Pa Jigsaw into the temple, the interior proved as magnificent and resplendent as anticipated. The temple's interior was a world apart from its exterior. Every beam and pillar radiated an aura of sacred antiquity, though such an atmosphere demanded immense time and resources to cultivate. Pa Jigsaw reminded Zhang Yi, as the assembly commences, monks from all temples will gather to discuss Buddhist Dharma. This process is lengthy and rather tedious, inevitably taking half a day. I ask for your patience. Zhang Yi nodded. No problem. The Dharma assembly typically lasted 3 to 5 days, as pilgrims from across the entire snowy plateau would come to pay homage. Pa Jigsaw left first. As the local Tusi, he must pay respects to the Undertaker and attend to numerous ceremonial duties. Knowing Zhang Yi disliked formalities, he instructed several subordinates to escort Zhang Yi on a tour of the nearby area. He only cautioned Zhang Yi not to wander too far and to avoid entering the Buddhist halls without permission, lest he cause offense. Zhang Yi nodded. The area was bustling at that moment. Monks from all directions had gathered, initiating what they called discussions on Dharma. Zhang Yi and his companions drew closer to observe the spectacle. The esoteric school's method of debate proved fascinating, resembling a stage-based contest. The champions sat seated at the front, awaiting challengers. Those who lost the debate would have to slink away in defeat. The debaters often accompanied their questions with clapping. Watching this scene, Zhang Yi couldn't help but think it resembled old women arguing in the countryside. Since their voices lacked intensity, they had to use exaggerated gestures to make their points seem more convincing. Though tedious, the variety of topics kept things somewhat entertaining. Zhang Yi and his companions wandered nearby, watching several debates unfold, much like eavesdropping on neighbors' quarrels. With Zhou Qi and Liang Yu by his side, the boredom didn't set in. Yang Xia pulled out her roasted melon seeds and shared them around. Everyone cracked seeds while watching the show. Originally, Zhang Yi had planned to use the Chuanzhou Dharma assembly as an opportunity to locate the few epsilons he encountered that night. Now, he could roughly confirm the identities of 2 individuals. One was the Undertaker, the other the Snow Mountain Eagle. However, there were still 2 others whose identities and origins he could not ascertain. This morning, however, all the Tusi had gone to attend the ceremony. The venue was simply too vast, packed with people everywhere. He couldn't possibly pick out anyone suspicious from such a crowd. So he simply spent the entire morning relaxing. As noon approached, monks pushed carts laden with numerous insulated containers out onto the grounds. Many devotees kneeling in pious worship outside Sunga temple had collapsed from exhaustion due to the bitter cold. Monks moved among the faithful, opening the containers and ladling out bowl after bowl of thick, viscous soup. It was dark and murky, its ingredients unknown. This was the midday meal distribution. Instantly, the square surrounding Sunga temple filled with the rich aroma of cooking. Meanwhile, in a banquet hall at Sunga temple, Luo Dan stood with hands elegantly clasped before him, bowing as he introduced today's feast to the esteemed dignitaries seated at the table. Honorable Chief Monk, esteemed Tusi, and venerable monks. Today I present to you the most succulent roast suckling lamb. His large hand gestured toward the table, laden so heavily with food it seemed it could barely hold all the dishes. At the very center, 2 large silver platters held mounds of meat, crisp and golden brown on the outside, tender and snow-white within. An intensely rich, almost hypnotic aroma had long since filled the entire room. The lambs selected for this feast were all born to use we raised with utmost care, each less than 100 days old. Such young meat is exceptionally tender, carrying a rich, milky flavor that melts in the mouth. The guests at the table could no longer contain their anticipation. The sound of throats clearing and saliva swallowing echoed throughout the room. Each person gripped their knife and fork tightly, eyes fixed greedily on the feast before them. The moment Luo Dan finished speaking, they scrambled forward, tearing chunks of meat from the platters and stuffing them into their mouths. It was hard to imagine these so-called noblemen and revered monks of the snowy plateau behaving so disgracefully. They didn't resemble a civilized group at all, they were clearly a pack of pigs fighting over scraps. Watching this spectacle, Luodan's lips curved into a faint smile. He gave a slight nod and promptly withdrew. Zhang Yi stepped outside the hall. The world beyond was bitterly cold, yet the interior was well heated. No matter how frigid it grew, the Buddha must never be chilled. Otherwise, how could they sit upon their meditation cushions, chanting scriptures with such profound compassion? Heavy snowflakes drifted through the sky. In this deep winter, the snow fell heavier than usual. The ancient Tantra palace stood towering, its crimson columns outside reaching 3 or 4 men tall, requiring 2 people to encircle them. Zhang Yi leaned against the doors, arms crossed over his chest, silently watching the snowfall outside. Zhou Qi followed and stood beside him, murmuring softly, "With this snowfall, who knows how many more will die?" Zhang Yi thought of the tens of thousands kneeling outside and sneered contemptuously. Those who've survived this far, even if they aren't mutant beings, their bodies must have mutated to withstand the cold. Survival of the fittest. That's the law of the world. Shortly after Zhang Yi's words faded, a deep, gentle voice suddenly reached his ears. "You are mistaken, benefactor. If all creatures relied solely on strength to oppress the weak, order would collapse, and the world would be plunged into chaos and suffering." Zhou Qi looked curiously in the direction of the voice. Zhang Yi's smile deepened as he slowly turned his head. Few could approach him without making a sound, not even the Undertaker of the Tantra. From the corridor nearby, a young man clad in luxurious robes approached at a measured pace. Tall in stature, his features weren't conventionally handsome, yet he radiated an aura that brought inner peace to those around him. This wasn't Zhang Yi's first encounter with him, they had crossed paths twice before. Zhang Yi nodded toward him. "You must be the Undertaker." The Undertaker lifted his head, about to engage Zhang Yi in conversation, when his gaze shifted involuntarily toward Zhang Yi's side, drawn like iron to a magnet. Standing beside Zhang Yi was Zhou Qi. Having just finished her meal, she wasn't clad head to toe in her combat suit. Thus, her beautiful face was clearly visible. Even through her clothing, her flawless figure was undeniable. While calling Zhou Qi heavenly beauty might be an exaggeration, her stunning looks rivaled top movie stars. Combined with her aristocratic grace, few could resist giving her a second glance. On the snowy plateau, she stood head and shoulders above everyone else. Even the otherworldly Undertaker couldn't help but lose himself for a moment. Though he quickly averted his gaze, this subtle movement didn't escape Zhang Yi's keen eyes. Seems this young Undertaker isn't as simple-minded as Pa Jigsaw claimed. Zhang Yi sneered inwardly. The Undertaker approached within a few paces of Zhang Yi and performed a Buddhist greeting. "Layman, we meet again." Zhang Yi raised an eyebrow, unsure which encounter the Undertaker referred to. Did he know about that night? Zhang Yi wasn't certain, but even if he had guessed correctly, it didn't much matter. Everyone knew why so many Epsilons had suddenly appeared on the snowy plateau. He didn't really need to pretend. "I've heard much about you." Zhang Yi replied indifferently, neither warm nor distant. The Undertaker inquired, "Have you had your midday meal, layman?" Zhang Yi nodded, indicating he had already eaten. The Undertaker smiled, saying he too had just finished eating and was out for a stroll. Zhang Yi asked curiously, "Have you already finished?" He had assumed the Undertaker would dine with Pa Jigsaw and the others. Hearing this, the Undertaker shook his head gently. "I'm not quite accustomed to eating with them." Zhang Yi thought of the so-called delicacies enjoyed by Pa Jigsaw and the others, and couldn't help feeling a bit queasy. "I thought that was reserved exclusively for the high-ranking officials of your southwest region. Who would have guessed that the Undertaker doesn't care for it?" The Undertaker pressed his palms together, eyes lowered, and said, "Amitabha, everything is the result of karma for all sentient beings." Zhang Yi rolled his eyes. These guys could pin everything on some vague, ethereal karma, utterly hypocritical. Still, he understood the entire southwest region was in this state, and he alone couldn't fix it. The Undertaker possessed formidable power, no doubt. But someone who'd secluded himself in Buddhist practice for over a decade couldn't possibly possess formidable political scheming or administrative skills. Even if he disapproved of certain practices among the Southwest region's high-ranking officials, he couldn't expect to resolve every issue single-handedly. This was precisely why Zhang Yi, despite being the strongest in the Jiangnan region, still chose peaceful coexistence with Blizzard City, entrusting Zhu Jing to oversee the entire district's affairs. The Undertaker discerned the disdain in Zhang Yi's gaze. He showed no anger, merely smiling faintly as he extended a hand to catch a snowflake drifting from the eaves. You may not believe it, layman, but everything happens for a reason. Just as you came to this place. All is predestined, there are no unexpected endings. Zhang Yi detected the Zen-like wisdom in the Undertaker's words, though he was never one for riddles. Zhang Yi nodded cheerfully. I think you have a point. The Undertaker smiled. This monk will take his leave. He said no more, merely turning to depart. It seemed he hadn't come specifically to see Zhang Yi after all, merely strolling by after his meal, coincidentally encountering him. Since Zhang Yi showed no desire to converse further, the Undertaker departed on his own accord. After all, an important afternoon ceremony awaited his personal oversight. Zhang Yi watched him depart. Once he was certain the monk was out of sight, a meaningful smile touched Zhang Yi's lips. Is this the pure, flawless, Buddha-devoted Undertaker that Pa Jigsaw mentioned? Zhou Qi remarked, he certainly gives off an aura untouched by worldly concerns. After all, he's spent over a decade in seclusion studying Dharma. He must have seen through everything. He radiates a transcendent, ethereal quality, as if he's transcended all distinctions between self and object. That's just your impression, Zhang Yi replied with a smile. His eyes sparkled with a bright light. This encounter might have been a mere coincidence, yet it yielded significant insights for him. Sometimes, growing up in an environment that's too pure isn't necessarily a good thing. Zhou Qi blinked her large eyes curiously. What do you mean? Zhang Yi, what did you see? Zhang Yi pondered for a moment before sharing a story with Zhou Qi. We once had a neighbor whose mother worked as a nurse at the hospital. After she gave birth to a child, she created an almost sterile environment for the baby from infancy, believing it would protect the child's health from external bacteria. Even the water her child drank was strictly distilled. Guess what happened in the end? Zhang Yi smiled at Zhou Qi. As a professional doctor, Zhou Qi knew exactly what the outcome would be. If that's the case, his body would become extremely sensitive and fragile. Once exposed to external bacteria, lacking any resistance, he'd actually be more prone to illness. Zhang Yi nodded toward the direction the Undertaker had departed. That guy was the same. Avoiding the outside world might allow one to devote themselves to Dharma practice, but it's like exquisite porcelain, touch it, and it shatters. Did you notice? Just now, when he looked at you, for a split second, his eyes held a hint of worldly desire. As a man, Zhang Yi understood the look in a man's eyes when he saw a beautiful woman. Even that Undertaker, wholly devoted to his Buddhist practice, couldn't help but show a fleeting change in his gaze when he saw a beauty of Zhou Qi's level. Though he quickly averted his eyes, trying to hide it. But Zhang Yi had been watching him the whole time, so he caught that moment. After that, he didn't look at Zhou Qi again. Zhou Qi's cheeks flushed slightly as she tightened her grip on his arm. What do you mean? Are you suggesting he fell for me at first sight? Zhang Yi took a deep breath and gently pinched her nose. You're beautiful. Isn't it natural for others to admire you? But that guy? He was purely captivated by your beauty. Which proves his defenses aren't impenetrable. Years of abstinence might have weakened his resistance in this area. Zhou Qi couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle. With his status and position, what woman could he not have? Don't joke like that. Zhang Yi replied, that's true in theory. But don't forget, the Undertaker is the spiritual symbol of the Southwest region, the very embodiment of the Tantra. Those below him can disregard the precepts however they please, but he absolutely cannot. Besides, he gazed at Zhou Qi's breathtakingly beautiful face, taking in her now even more alluring figure, and smiled proudly. When has he ever seen a woman as beautiful as you? Zhou Qi asked curiously, "So you're saying this is his weakness?" Zhang Yi replied, "It's the weakness of every man under heaven." Shou Keir's eyes lit up. "Are you planning to exploit this weakness against him?" At this point, she stared at Zhang Yi cautiously. "Don't you dare have any ideas about me." Zhang Yi pinched her petite nose slightly, a hint of irritation in his voice. "What nonsense! You really are trying to drive me mad. Rest assured, I have no interest in wearing a green hat." But, he glanced toward the direction the Undertaker had departed, his eyes darting, murmuring softly, "As long as he has a weakness, sooner or later, a way to deal with him will be found." Time moved into the afternoon. For ordinary people, the Dharma assembly had only just formally commenced. Outside Sunga Temple, a massive platform had long been erected. Beyond the platform, tens of thousands of people who had gathered early knelt on the ground, hands reverently cradling incense burners, awaiting the Dharma teachings from the Undertaker and the Grand Lama. Representatives from the 4 great Tusi families had all arrived. Pa Jigsan led Zhang Yi and the others to a designated spot on the platform to sit and wait. Zhang Yi scanned the crowd and spotted members of the other 4 major families. He didn't know many personally, but he recognized the heads of those families. "Are the people I encountered that night among them?" Zhang Yi's gaze swept over their ranks. However, each family had sent numerous representatives, most clad head to toe in combat gear that obscured their features. Zhang Yi's mind drifted to the resistance army's warnings. He steeled himself, waiting for the unfolding events. The Chuanzhao Dharma assembly officially commenced. Lamas clad in crimson robes carried massive copper gongs, striking solemn and majestic melodies. The sound, like the tolling of great bells, pierced the heavens, instantly rendering the atmosphere solemn. Tantric practitioners bowed their heads even lower. Shortly after, a monk from Sunga Temple emerged from the rear, clad in elaborate ceremonial robes. Each held ritual implements, some a drum with skin as white as jade and a body crimson as blood, beating them rhythmically as they walked, murmuring incantations. The drum beats intertwined with the copper gong's resonance, a sound so profound it made everyone solemn. Soon after, figures clad in multicolored robes emerged, singing and dancing wildly, their hands and feet moving in a frenzy. A dozen lamas carried a large barrel and placed it in the center of the square. On the other side, a cauldron at least 5 or 6 meters in diameter was already set upon a stove. Zhang Yi found the spectacle quite intriguing, but soon, the atmosphere grew distinctly unsettling. From outside, hundreds of monk soldiers suddenly appeared, escorting over 20 ragged, disheveled figures toward the square's center. Heavy chains bound their bodies, causing them to limp as they walked, their shackles clanking loudly. "Who are these people?" Zhang Yi instinctively looked toward Pa Jigsan. "The Chuanzhao Dharma Assembly, is it also for executing criminals?" Pa Jigsan explained to Zhang Yi, "These are captured resistance army members. To the outside world, we claim they are demon clan subjects seduced by the demon kingdom, intent on opposing the Tantra. Executing them today is part of the ritual." Zhang Yi immediately understood, it was exactly as they had suspected. Indeed, the 4 great families in Sunga Temple were setting a trap here, waiting for the resistance army to come to their rescue. Among these prisoners, Zhang Yi recognized several familiar faces. Leading the procession was a woman, bound by the heaviest chains. 4 powerful monk soldiers, wielding Vajra clubs, escorted her closely. After speaking with Dolma, Zhang Yi already knew her identity. The second in command of the resistance army, Bam. The very woman who led the ambush against the Undertaker when Zhang Yi and his group entered the snowy region that day. In an instant, everything became crystal clear. This was a calculated gamble. The execution of their second in command would deal a devastating blow to the resistance if they failed to rescue her, not only in casualties but also in lost morale. Yet attempting a rescue would inevitably walk straight into the net of heaven already laid. Any intervention by the resistance army would be nothing but a suicide mission. Zhang Yi felt a twinge of curiosity, wondering how that snow eagle would manage to rescue his comrades. As the resistance army was escorted away, curses erupted from all around. All the Tantra Buddhist followers glared at them, gnashing their teeth, and began hurling whatever objects they could find at the prisoners. The followers gnashed their teeth, denouncing their betrayal of Tantra, their disloyalty to the Undertaker and Sunga temple. Soon, they were all brought to the center of the square. On both sides of the square, execution stakes had long been erected from massive trees. They were bound high up, standing like flags in the square. This was a display, showing the people the fate awaiting those who rebelled against the local Tusi and Sunga temple. A High Lama from Sunga temple stepped forward, loudly denouncing their various deeds. These resistance army have aligned themselves with demons. They refuse to see the people of the snowy plateau live in happiness, persistently opposing the great Undertaker and the chief monk, and slandering the Tusi who tirelessly defend our authority. It is precisely because of these individuals that our lives are so difficult today. Only by eliminating the resistance army will the snowy plateau truly embrace peace and happiness. The loudspeakers carried these words to every ear. Simultaneously, the tsurmang and ritual instruments played solemn music, creating an atmosphere as imposing as a prison. It stirred the soul, compelling people to instinctively kneel lower. Sure enough, infected by the Grand Lama's fervor, the curses from outside the enclosure grew louder. They hurled whatever they held in their hands far across the field, smashing it against the resistance army hung upon the execution frame. On the faces of those resistance army, some wore cold smiles, some numbness, some profound sorrow. They tried to roar back in defiance, but their voices were too faint. The wind carried them away, and no one could hear. Next, a series of intricate rituals were completed. Amidst the crowd's anticipation, the Undertaker finally made his personal appearance. The instant he emerged, a golden radiance surged from Sunga temple, illuminating all directions as if a golden sun had risen from its walls. This warm, gentle light bathed every believer's face, drawing expressions of rapturous ecstasy. Many believers were so moved they wept aloud, tears streaming down their faces. Undertaker! Undertaker! Great Undertaker! Bless your people. Disperse this bitter cold, enrich our land, and grant us a life of happiness. The golden light shot straight into the sky, actually dispersing the dark clouds overhead and forcing the heavy snowfall to abruptly cease. The believers grew even more ecstatic, kneeling on the ground and frantically kowtowing while chanting the Undertaker's name. After reaching the Epsilon realm, every mutant would possess profound and unfathomable powers. The method used by the Undertaker was indeed perfect for a charlatan, great for scaring people. The Lama's chanting grew louder. The Undertaker, clad in a deep red ceremonial robe, appeared slowly on the square. A soft golden light enveloped him, making him appear like a deity. Tens of thousands of devotees before him roared his name like a tidal wave. Even Pa Jigsaw and the others prostrated themselves on the ground, not daring to lift their heads to look directly at his face. This is the power of religion, Zhang Yi murmured silently within his heart. Having lived on the snowy plateau for decades, these people had been subtly influenced. Now, merely a hint of a miracle from the Undertaker was enough to make them prostrate themselves obediently. Zhang Yi observed the Undertaker, resplendent in golden light like a Buddha, then glanced at the massive copper chimes and ritual implements fashioned from human skin and bones, which resonated ceaselessly. A faint, enigmatic smile touched his lips. So this was the essence of religion. The influence of religion on people ultimately relies on this very method. Zhang Yi observed the esoteric Tantra ritual and felt it resembled the pyramid schemes he had heard about. To foster cohesion within a group, one must establish a common enemy, creating an external threat. Then, collective consciousness is cultivated, compelling everyone to prioritize the group's interests over their own. As for brainwashing, it's achieved through large gatherings where people spout vague, grandiose principles, make empty promises, and use thunderous voices to intimidate. Gradually, individuals become just another face in the crowd, swept along until they're fully converted into devotees. Thus, as Zhang Yi gazed upon the lofty figure of the Undertaker at the square's center, he couldn't help but see him as something akin to a charlatan. Yet the man's expression was undeniably devout. Perhaps his faith in Buddha was genuine, and that was precisely what made him the most terrifying. Standing before tens of thousands, the Undertaker began expounding the Dharma. His voice was pleasing, gentle as a spring breeze, sweeping over the crowd and entering every ear. All things are bound by cause and effect. The suffering one endures in this world is a trial, a test from the Buddha for all beings. When you pass this test, you can attain Buddhahood instantly and ascend to the Pure Land. Human suffering stems from excessive desires within the heart. Greed, lust, gluttony, jealousy, anger. These are the roots of pain. Only by pursuing your true nature, free from external attachments, can you attain liberation. The Undertaker babbled on for a while, talking all about Dharma. The crowd below listened with tears streaming down their faces. Many wore expressions of sudden enlightenment before prostrating themselves flat on the ground in a full-body bow. In such bitter cold, it was hard to fathom how they endured it. Yet Yang Xinxin explained to Zhang Yi and the others, the power of belief can indeed act like advanced hypnosis, making one forget cold, pain, and hunger. After delivering his Dharma sermon, the Undertaker retreated to his throne. Devoted solely to Dharma practice, he was naturally unfamiliar with the intricate procedures of the Chuanzhao Dharma assembly. All matters still required the guidance of the Daiji chief monk. Striding to the center of the square, he swept his gaze across the assembled crowd before fixing it upon the resistance army bound high upon the execution frame. Amitabha! He pressed his palms together in prayer, chanting the Buddha's name before his voice turned icy. Chaos reigns across the land, and demons have emerged. The remnants of the demon kingdom that once ravaged the snowy plateau have resurfaced. They seek to corrupt humanity into demon clan, just as they did millennia ago, bringing catastrophic ruin upon the entire snowy plateau. But under the Undertaker's leadership, we will never allow this to happen again. Immediately, someone among the faithful below raised a fist and shouted, "Kill them! Kill them!" One voice began, then drew 10, then 100, until tens of thousands around the square roared in unison, "Kill them!" Their eyes burned with hatred as they stared at the resistance army on the execution platform, as if every torment they endured today had been inflicted by these very men. They gnashed their teeth, consumed by a savage desire to pounce and tear flesh from their bodies bite by bite. Now, right here, we shall sacrifice the flesh and blood of these demon clan to the gods and Buddhas. This is our declaration of war against the demon kingdom. It will represent our tantra, which will never yield to the demons. The shouts below grew even more frenzied. The sheer madness of the scene sent a fine layer of goosebumps crawling over Zhang Yi and his companions. The deranged expressions on those cultists' faces were truly terrifying. Then, with a sweeping gesture from Daiji, several uniformly dressed figures carrying swords ascended the platform. Zhang Yi recognized the leader. It was Luo Dan, the chef from the Paji household. His hair remained meticulously parted in a 3-to-7 style, likely slicked down with pomade, not a strand out of place. Zhang Yi thought to himself, it's about to begin. What followed was undoubtedly the execution of the resistance army prisoners. But the arrival of a chef sent a chill down everyone's spine. Zhou Qi instinctively clutched Zhang Yi's arm tighter, her voice trembling as she stammered, their so-called execution. Could they really be planning to? She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence, the very thought too brutal to contemplate. Now they finally understood the purpose of the large wooden barrel and the enormous cauldron brought to the center of the square. Yang Xia swallowed hard, her stomach churning. Zhang Yi. Maybe we should leave now. Though she'd witnessed the Paji family's methods of treating people like sheep before, that had been only a fleeting glimpse. Now, however, she was watching them boil a group of living people alive, something truly unbearable to witness. If you don't want to see it, close your eyes and block out the sounds. Leaving suddenly now would draw too much attention. Zhang Yi's voice was cold and detached. He wasn't angry at Yang Xia, rather, the scene before him weighed heavily on his own heart. Especially when he looked down at the followers below. Upon hearing that the resistance army was to be slaughtered, greed flashed in their eyes as they instinctively raised their rice bowls. Only then did Zhang Yi understand why Pa Jigsaw and the others treated such matters with such casual familiarity. It turned out that on the present-day snowy plateau, this was the most ordinary thing imaginable. Pa Jigsaw eagerly explained to Zhang Yi, this ritual is called sky burial. It must be performed by a professional sky burial master. The process of sky burial involves cutting the flesh into suitable pieces to feed to the eagles. Here on the snowy plateau, we believe eagles are messengers of the gods, capable of carrying human souls to the Pure Land. Thus, this ritual purifies them. Zhang Yi scanned his surroundings but saw not a single eagle. No wonder, any animals still living on the snowy plateau today wouldn't dare approach humans. They'd risk being captured and eaten. Most eagles couldn't endure the extreme cold and had long since frozen to death. So with no eagles, you hire people to substitute? Zhang Yi asked with a hint of amusement. Pa Jigsaw chuckled. After death, they enter the bellies of Tantra Buddhists. That too is a form of purification. This method carried an additional, peculiar implication. By consuming the flesh and blood of the rebels, these devotees would be far less likely to defect and join the resistance army in the future. As the chief executioner, Luo Dan meticulously completed the preparations in the center of the square. Sky burial required a specialized platform and a full set of carving knives. His complete toolkit included knives for cutting, splitting, and deboning, everything needed. Before the ceremony, prayers were offered to the gods and Buddhas, beseeching purification for the deceased and their passage to the Western Paradise. Luo Dan stood in the center of the square, carefully cradling the knife in his hands as he murmured prayers for the condemned according to ritual. The sky burial ceremony was a process of reincarnation prepared for the deceased. But today, this sky burial was for the living. Per the Four Great Tusi's decree, these resistance army members would not be killed with a single sword stroke. Instead, they must be forced to watch their own flesh being shaved off, boiled in cauldrons, and then shared among the faithful. This was an utterly brutal punishment, not only physical agony, but psychological humiliation. The resistance army had rallied under the banner of overthrowing the Tusi lords and liberating the serfs. Yet as they died, countless serfs cheered their demise, scrambling for their flesh. What bitter irony! Deji sat in his chair, his piercing gaze sweeping the surroundings. He then addressed the monks under his command, "Stay alert. The rebels may strike at any moment." The monks nodded solemnly, "Rest assured, Chief Monk. Should they dare appear, the net of heaven will snare and destroy them in the first time." Deji nodded with satisfaction. "What I fear is that they won't come." Meanwhile, at the sky burial platform, Luo Dan had already raised his sword. A resistance army was bound and dragged forward, stripped naked, then tightly secured to the platform. Luo Dan looked down coldly at him. The man's eyes held only fury and scorn, not a trace of fear. Luo Dan declared, "Let me guide you onto the path of reincarnation." He raised his gleaming long knife, poised to strike the resistance army's chest. Amidst the kneeling crowd, a pair of eyes suddenly sharpened with intensity. Boom! 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 Explosions erupted violently around the entire plaza, shaking the earth. The kneeling worshippers let out wails of agony and collapsed to the ground. The explosions came too suddenly, someone had clearly planted explosives around the plaza beforehand. Chaos erupted as people and horses tumbled everywhere.